to move things around so that there's a bit of a break in the first few matters of the agenda. And so I'd like to have the committee reports happen before the strategic planning tonight. So that's the one change I want to make.
We should probably go offline like we did last time to talk about the bond issue.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, we do it that time. Yeah.
Okay. Sounds good. All right. Give me 1 second. Okay, here we are. Good evening, folks. Happy holidays in December. Here we are, last meeting of the 2022 year. As a mission moment tonight, I'm going to borrow from this past week's SLC meeting and the student learning highlight, which is extracurricular in its fashion. So we've had a really festive month of performances and exhibitions and kids just showcasing some of the things that they've experienced and learned and developed over the past few months of school in their enrichment courses, their clubs, their athletic programs, etc. As you all know, this is a big part of our school. We have a wealth of programs available to kids, and we think that in offering a full education to students, experiencing these sorts of endeavors are really important. And so you see a couple of photos here from our middle school. The one on the left, we had all of our 6th graders, as well as some of our 8th graders, run a full theater showcase this past Wednesday afternoon. It was one of the first full community meetings we've had as a middle school since we've been back in action this year and since COVID. So really great event. Morgan Stevenson, who's on the left in the red dress, does really solid, incredible work in giving the lifting to students. So students were the stage crew. They wrote many of the skits. They played a very big part in the facilitation of the skits and the showcase, as well as performing. So a highlight for the school. We had a visitor, a state assembly person's special kind of coordinating person in education came by, and we get to chat with her afterwards. So it's just a nice event. On the right, we also had a fall athletics ceremony, award ceremony at our middle school. This was a week and a half ago. Also a great event. We had 5 teams, I think, represented. A majority of those teams are coached by teachers. So there's some really strong relationships that have been built both in classrooms and on the playing field through those experiences. So this is a photo of our flag football team. And you see Mr. Berkeley, our 7th grade art teacher, in the middle, really excited. It was, I think the highlight for me was hearing coaches talk about their players and the experiences over the season. Mr. Berkeley got emotional in a really positive way as he spoke. So nice heartfelt night for team. But again, stepping back, this is who we are as a school. And y'all should be proud of all that we're bringing to our kids experientially. So that's our mission moment for tonight. Hey, Jeanette, welcome. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. So I think next we'll move to the head of school report, which y'all have in your inboxes. Give me a moment as I open that up. Oh, wrong. Open it up. Let's try that again. You guys see the school leader report in front of you? Excellent. Thanks, Melissa. And so I think there are a few points I want to raise. There are updates on what was sent I guess last night. So let me kind of underline those. First, just looking at the headlines, which I get out each month. And if there are questions folks have, please just shout them out. I just want to focus on a few select things. So I think just with state exams and assessments in general, I want to say a few words there. So I-1 exams were administered back in October, November. We've since analyzed those results and done some reteaching according to those results and then seen that through. IA2 is going to be happening at both sites in late January. So what I'm going to do is in January provide a full report on just how things have gone there, as well as combine that with some more recent comparative data we have for state exams, both at the middle school for ELA and math, as well as for high school Regents exams. So expect a full report in January when we come back together. There were a couple of things I wanted to double back on before bringing that to the full board during a meeting. So that's that. A couple of other things I'll tout and going back to the mission moment and just what we're bringing to our kids. We've had a host of experiences beyond the building over the past month and a half. And so you see a list of all of the trips that kids have taken part in alongside their teachers during that time. If you look at the scoop every week, you'll see lots of photos and highlights of kids experiencing these various gems in New York City. And so really proud of that as well. And so in terms of staffing, I'll say right now, there are 3 current vacancies that we have in the mix that we've been covering internally. These vacancies existed last month. I think since we last spoke, we've hired 1 high school humanities learning specialist. As an update, we expect to have 1 more vacancy in mid-January with a middle school history teacher leaving for personal reasons. And so we're now coming up with a plan to transition someone in to care for our 6th grade kids when this person departs. And so I think I think as we said back in the fall, we're stretched, we're making things work. I think some people are really hustling to kind of cover and care for kids with these vacancies, but we're okay right now. And so that's the status of staffing. I sent a note out to our full team last week, just trying to rally the troops and get people excited about connecting with their networks. There's a referral bonus in effect. And so those are some of the things we're doing as we look to cover a couple of these positions with really great people. And I think next month I'll have an update on just what we're thinking about with regard to hiring for next year, which is just around the corner. So that's a hiring update. Are there any questions on headlines as you peruse them? Okay, I'm going to jump into miscellaneous updates, and I think I want to cover most of these here. First, as I sent out in the note last night and then back following our last meeting, annually we do have a trustees self-assessment survey. The purpose of that is to sort of step back and as individual board members, as well as a collective group, think about areas of relative strength and areas of perhaps focus moving forward into the year. And so it's a way in which the board can engage in real conversation about their work and impact on school. So I think as of now, there are 4 members of the board that have completed that. So there are 4 folks that still have to complete that. I'll provide some individual updates as needed, but if you haven't had a chance to do that, the ask is that you do so as soon as you can. It shouldn't take more than 10 to 15 minutes to complete. Beyond that, I want to say a bit about end of year donations. And so I sent an email out this morning to about 1,000 supporters who've given to the school before. We received a couple of donations this morning in response, including at least 1 former board member. And so the ask here is that all of you both make an annual donation. The amount is secondary. It's more about being able to say that our board gives to our school, both their time as well as some of the resources. And so that's the ask. And then the second ask is I'm going to send a follow-up note, and it's a note that I typically use with my closer network in a secondary ask. And it goes something like, hey, you may have seen the note we submitted to our full range of supporters yesterday or last week. I'd like to follow up with a closer group of people who mean a lot to me, and then you put forward the ask from there. So I'll send that out and people can customize it as they wish, but I found that I get more of a response from those individual letters or even small group letters than from the bigger letter. So I think the ask here, I think, I'll put it, just be direct. If we do that, I know that we'll be able to raise some money at the year end. If we don't, we're probably not going to. So the ask is that you take a couple of minutes to reach out to some folks who you think care about education, care about the work you do in benefiting education in our school, put forward the ask. Are there questions there? Sal, you've been pretty good about kind of being just an advocate of kind of fundraising and donations. Would you add anything?
The last part of what you asked cut off. Did you say just general thoughts?
Yeah. I mean, you've been pretty active with regard to fundraising in the past in terms of like, hey, let's do this. And so anything from your angle worth also underlining here?
No, I think you covered it. I mean, personally, I have, just because of the way things have been, I really haven't the past couple of years as much as I have in the past before that. But I imagine that's the same for everyone.
Yeah, I think that's right. So we're kind of like getting back into things and shaking some of the dust off. So,
yeah.
So, all right. Moving on to the next thing, in terms of just time, I wanted to highlight a couple of events that are coming up in January that you're welcome to take part in. We do have family ambassador meetings monthly. They happen via Zoom. We'd be thrilled to have anyone drop by and say hello and thank families for taking part in these meetings. And so that's an event. And there are a couple of others kind of going on. I'm going to have myself or Chris send out some invites to y'all. We did that last month, and it was good to get a couple of people into some of the events that we did have at the school last month as a result. So those will be on your calendars. If you're able to take part, let me know, and we'll make sure you're taken care of when you visit. Fourth update here, I guess, would be just my work with Vince Marone, who's our public relations strategist. He got to visit the school last Wednesday. He saw the theater performance. We got to meet with someone from our local assembly person's office. It was good. I'm learning from him in terms of how the political scene in the school world works. And he's been helpful in kind of providing resources. I've listed some of them here in this monthly report. So we're going to continue going pretty hard with things in January, but has been beneficial both in providing resources and in connecting us with the people that matter, and with helping us sort of strategize and thinking about how to use our scarce time to have impact and have more people excited about who we are as a school and what we're hoping to do as a school. We're going to talk about the facility updates momentarily, so I'll skip over that now. And then I think one quick update. I heard a note from Paula Orlando, who, as you may recall, took over as our liaison with the state about 3 months ago. She's unfortunately moving on to another department within SED, and so will be leaving her post and not serving as our liaison any further. I have no additional information at this time about who would take over, but there are some pretty serious shortages in her department right now. So we'll see. I will update the board as soon as I learn more. And I think that's all that I wanted to underline from this month's school leader report. Are there any other questions on other topics addressed here or things that folks would want to discuss? Okay. Next up, I'm going to talk through just some highlights of the dashboard for this month. So give me a moment to share that. And so there are 4 or 5 areas of school in data form I wanted to note here. We always talk about enrollment, so I want to do so tonight. No real change over the past month with Table 1 student enrollment. We're still at 99% of our targeted enrollment for the year. We've been pretty consistent with enrolling about 540-ish, just over that, students over the past couple of months. I think typically we stabilize around this point, so we expect to be at that over the course of the rest of the year. We will backfill, but we won't kind of pursue a recruit aggressively at this point in time. More of our efforts right now are moving to recruitment for the 23-24 school year. And so that's where things stand there. Are there any questions about student enrollment? All right, I want to move forward to table 3, which is related to student attrition. There were a small number of students at the high school that recently left over the past month. And some of those departures were due to perhaps a disciplinary issue in which a student was suspended and then in coming back ended up leaving the school. Not what we want, as we welcome kids back, but this was the decision of parents. And so there's no clear actions we're taking at this point in time. We're simply monitoring this to get a sense of the degree to which we have to make any sort of change or response. I'll say that we are launching our peer mediation program in the coming month, and I think that's going to be really good for helping students work through some of the issues that might result in some disciplinary measures in a proactive, effective fashion. So just again, keeping an eye on that. Any questions there? The next table I want to talk through relates to student attendance. And here you get to sort of be in the weeds a bit. I assume that most boards don't kind of look at attendance at this level, but I think it's important in really getting a sense of what is going on. And so I think I've mentioned our attendance levels have been within 5% of what they typically are in a non-COVID time. We have had more students who have been absent because of flu or COVID or some other ailment in this year, staff too. And so I think that shows in some of the data you see here. What we're trying to do is have a certain number of students with really strong attendance, a certain number of students with mediocre attendance, and then us putting resources towards students who are chronically absent. And so there's this sort of weighting of 85% of our students have really strong attendance, 10% have sort of a good attendance, but could be better. And then we don't want any more than 5% of our students with attendance struggles. And that's the way we're kind of built. And I think we're built probably more robustly than a lot of other schools with regard to supporting students at the tier 3 level with attendance issues with a big, strong social work team. So we're not kind of where we are, and that's why you see these values in pink right now. And so I think we're also monitoring this. I will say there's been some good movement over the past month with regard to tier 3 students, chronically absent students improving their attendance. So I think the work of our social teams have helped. But I think right now this is something that we look at quite often. I look at it weekly with our co-principals in culture and ops to get a sense of where things stand, and the work is in having them do the same with their teams. So I'll just sort of name that as a work in progress for us as a school right now. And I think that other schools are facing the same sorts of efforts. Are there questions about tiered attendance or attendance in general at the school? Okay. I next want to focus in on out of school suspension. We've haven't talked about this so much. It is the case, unfortunately, that at this time of the year, there's typically more kind of action or volatility going on that require disciplinary measures. I think at both sites, we've seen some of this. At the middle school, there was more elevated kind of disciplinary issues and fights off campus that, do impact our school culture within that we address. And the same at the middle school. And so there has been an uptick in suspensions over the past month and a half. Same here. We monitor this closely. I think that's where we are now. And at both sites, we're going to be launching peer mediation as a proactive measure in helping to support students in de-escalating conflict in healthy ways. So I do think that will have an impact on supporting kids here. So I'll name that too. This is something else that I think we're keeping an eye on that is something that we want to counter and address. Questions about OSS? All right, I think with that, I want to now move on to one last table, and that relates to family participation. The last time we met was coming off of day 1 of our renewal visit. And it was just before the Thanksgiving holiday, and we had conferences since then. And so just a quick report out on conferences. Strongly attended at both sites, especially strong at the high school, with 3/4 of our families taking part in conferences on one of these two days or in the week prior. So we met our goal with regard to fall conferences overall. And I think one of the best practices that we've carried over this year that I think we discovered last year, the year before, isn't having an elongated series of days of conferences where we were focusing on some students who really would benefit from specialized small group conferences with our academic teams and social work teams in the week before our full school conferences. And so as a result of that, we just had a lot of those families that may not otherwise have come take part. And so I think that is something we'll continue to utilize moving forward. But overall, some good conversations there. And perhaps one of the reasons for the improvement in Tier 3 attendance issues over the past month and a half was these conferences. Well, so would you add anything there with regard to conferences and its impact on either academics or some of the attendance moves we've seen?
No, I think that about covers it. Having touch points with families is super important in investing them in their students' outcomes. And I think this helps to demystify some of the of what's going on with GPAs, the impact of attendance on school, and what children should be focusing on as well.
Cool. Thanks for that. Let's see. So I think beyond that, as I mentioned, I'd like to move strategic planning after the committee reports, just to break things up a little bit. So I think the next move would be to have committees report out. And with that, we begin with the AFC. Chris, is Alex taking part in tonight's meeting?
She'll be here in just a minute. Let me text her right now.
Cool. Sounds good. And let's see, we'll give her a minute. Maybe in the meantime, we can move on to, well, as I look at these, I want to do a bit of a deep dive on ECPC related stuff, and there'll be a deep dive on DFC. So I think as we're waiting for Alex, Jeanette, is there anything that you kind of want to name as a summary for Friday's AFC meeting that is worthy of the full board's attention?
I don't think so. I assume that some of the items we discussed with Chris will be coming later for approval to the extent relevant. So nothing unusual jumped out in the financial report, thankfully. So I don't think so.
Yeah.
Alex is on as well.
Yeah. And so I think Alex's term for this year thus far has been pretty boring, which I think is a good thing in the world of finance. And so Alex, you want to say a few words about just the monthly update as of the end of October? If you want me to provide a screen share, I can. It's up to you.
Whatever you guys prefer. I mean, it is through October. So it's a little bit of a look back period.
Sure, I'll do it. Let's see.
Okay. You want me to share, Josh? I got mine.
Yeah. All right, I guess you're all set. Yeah. Thanks, Chris.
I am. So just our financial indicators page, everything is well within state ed metrics, with the exception of enrollment, but that is because we do have that bigger charter enrollment of 655. And then a lot of that information just repeats on the second page. What we are reporting on this report is the number of students we've invoiced for, which is 520. We've budgeted 519. So there is a slight variance as of October. When we move down to the budgeting, revenue, and expenses, what I've done here is I've looked ahead at the January invoice to capture how many students we have invoiced for in January to try to narrow down our variances a little bit. So we will see a significant variance in revenues, about 880,000 from enrollment. Right now, we know that there are some expenses that are projected to be higher than budget that the board has already voted on, transportation and some additional monies for club activities. So right now our projected variance from operations and expenses is about 150,000. I will tighten this up as we move forward because I do expect that we will try to capture the resources that we can to support the students as we move through the year. But right now we will be seeing a pretty significant variance in enrollment. We did have some higher than budgeted capital expenses for replacements of computers and some other equipment. So you will see that there is a projected variance right now in capital expenditures. Nothing to call out on the balance sheet, nor the profit and loss. Our actual net income is higher even at this point, and that's without the major change in enrollment. So I do expect to see that gap get larger. And then cash for the next several months is steady. We will be able to meet that 60 days cash on hand, no problem, for the foreseeable future. So I don't see any need to move any money around at this point. Any questions on the October report?
I think I'd only just clarify for team here and going back to I think the second page you presented. As I mentioned, we're at 541 students. We're budgeted at 519. And so even going back to the first page of the summary page, Alex, in looking at this right now, this lists our percentage of budget to our charter max enrollment at 79%. We're probably closer to 83% actually when looking at our enrollment at this point in time of 541, 542.
Yeah, and we will see that November there will be a jump, and then it will, stabilize around January.
Cool. So there'll be some approval items shortly. Jake's on now, which is great. So we do have a quorum officially. And so I think we'll next move on to a report out regarding DFC. So I think with that, there's been a whole lot of work with regard to the building. And so maybe with the work here, we're going to be talking about a bit of this during the executive session, as there's some decision making to be made. But I think in addition to facility related discussions, there was some light discussion regarding fundraising and development and what we might do in the spring. I think the general sense here is that let's see what happens with renewal. Let's see what happens with purchase of building. Wait a little while and then make some decisions about whether there's some sort of fundraising event happening in the spring. I realize that timing is a bit tight, but we would just have to plan it accordingly. And so I don't know if Sal or Jake or Jim would add anything to the mix. Again, we'll talk about facility related stuff short in a few minutes. Cool. So with that, we'll move into the ECPC meeting, and I think we used that meeting to present out on some perception data that was collected by the school this fall. And so we've done some action planning as a school. Sal got to hear that and provide some feedback on it. I'm going to give you an abbreviated version of that today, and then we'll move into SLC discussions and the strategic planning portion of the meeting. So I'm going to share my screen one more time. And we begin. So as I said, we collected some information from families in the fall and from staff and from students. We do and use this sort of survey for a couple of reasons. One is just to collect information on where we're strong and where we're weak in the eyes of our major stakeholders, and then to ensure that their perceptions are in our minds as we make school-based decisions. So we adopted this sort of system of feedback 2 years ago. Our goal really is really to make sure that once we've identified some areas of strength and growth in the fall, to create action plans and then move forward with them. We administer a second survey in the spring, and so the idea is to see some progress in key areas over the course of the school year. So I'll move on. In terms of response rates this year, fairly strong. If you look at the last column, you'll see stronger response rates among students and teachers than what we had last year. We're still fairly low with regard to families. It's hard to get the attention of families, and have them respond in the way that we've done things thus far. So we had a slightly higher response rate, but there's work to do. And so I think in looking at the findings among families, not likely representative of all families, but still there's some value in looking at the individual data and getting a sense of how a subsample feel about what they're experiencing at school with their kids. So I'll talk through some of the strengths among families. Among that smaller group, the families that did respond mentioned that they feel as if the school values diversity and that their kids feel respected at the school. They also put forward that they believe our school climate is favorable to learning and that their students enjoy going to school. So that was the finding across both sites. Areas of improvement included that families expressed some concern regarding violence at school at both sites. And so it's a little unclear here whether this is like a general sort of like theme among schools with some of the atrocities that have happened across the nation over the past several years or specific to schools. I think there's a little more data to dig here. We'll talk about that momentarily. And then at the middle school, there was a finding that there's some families out there that aren't quite certain that their child has someone to go to who they have access to on the regular, both academically and with regard to behavior management. And so that might be insightful as we think about some of the ways in which we've changed up advisory this year versus other years. So in terms of actions we're taking, we got to figure out a way to increase the response rates among families if we want really good data. And until we do, we're going to be kind of digging for things that might not be representative. In addition to that, we're going to hold a bit of a focus group or do some discussion with our family ambassadors during the January meeting to learn more about the concerns over violence and solicit some ideas about possible concerns here with them. And then the other thought is just in looking back at that middle school response, hiring an academic counselor. We've got a healthy academic counseling team at the high school, expanding it down to middle school. There are a few reasons for that I'll get into not only with this share out, but with another later on today. And so that's where we are with regard to our actions. And we've set some goals that are measurable for where we are now with perceptions as of the fall to after taking these actions where we'd like to be and where we'd like to see perceptions improve. So that's families. Are there any questions from the team about perceptions that families share this fall? I'm going to move forward. We also surveyed our staff at both the middle school and high school, and there was some overlap here among strengths. And so this is staff providing answers to questions of the tool that we use at both sites where we did disaggregate across sites. And so at the middle school, teacher efficacy was seen as strength. Teachers believe that they're equipped and pretty good at having productive conversations with upset parents. That was one kind of outlier in the strength area. And then the others that they felt good about where they are content-wise in their expertise and in what they teach. In addition to that, there was a strength perceived by staff among their relationships with leadership in a few select areas at the middle school, relating to respect, being treated fairly, and that leaders have their best interests in mind. And so all notable in terms of areas of growth, effective communication of important information was something that came up that we want to improve on. And also we want to learn more about. So in terms of actions, for us, there's an interest in us kind of sitting down with teachers and getting a bit more information about exactly what sort of communication of important information is not being provided in the way that maybe it should. So we'll conduct a focus group there sometime in January. And then within that focus group, collect some ideas and look to put a few of these ideas into action. And we've got some goals here around this area of growth to communication within this survey that we'll again administer in the spring. So that's the middle school. At the high school, some overlap. Again, staff and leader relationships was seen as a strength at the high school, as well as teacher efficacy. A different area of improvement among staff was school climate and just how supportive our students in interactions with each other. We found instances of kids perhaps not being as nice to others as they could be. And so there's been some things that we've done recently and some things that we'll continue to do, including And Melissa, you can say a few words about this. I think you were more involved in this, but there was a kind of mapping activity that staff took part in recently where they looked at, hey, do each of our kids have someone they can go to, someone who they trust on staff? Melissa, you want to say a bit about that?
Yeah, it's an activity called relationship mapping, and we used Panorama comes with recommendations of actions to take. So we adapted this one for our own school, and at the grade level had folks identify students with whom they had strong relationships. And then we looked for themes where students did not or adults did not report having strong relationships with students, and made plans for greater amounts of outreach, noticing positive deposits with kids.
In addition to that, we took part recently in a week of kindness event at the school. And that was just about spreading joy and having certain activities over the course of the week that just represented doing nice things for each other in somewhat random ways. And so I think that was successful in kind of like uplifting and making people happy. Melissa and Grace got to pass out coffee on Friday morning to all of the staff who were really happy about that. And so Melissa got to live out her dream of being a barista. Very cool. I think we've also done a solid job this year of just having more experiences that create possibilities for positive interactions among kids within club programming, within extracurriculars, other sorts of initiatives at the school. So these things are happening and will continue to happen, but good to get this sort of feedback to know that like it's needed and helpful. So that's across sort of staff feedback and some of the things we're doing to respond to that feedback. We also looked at student responses. And so among students at our middle school, some of the strengths put forward to us is kids felt like there are rigorous expectations and what teachers encourage kids to do, and that is to be their best. Safety was seen as a strength, and also student and staff relationships and how teachers are respectful toward kids. So those were things the kids put forward at the middle school in terms of areas of growth, how excited kids are about coming to classes was something kids reported that like could be improved. And then a sense of belonging and how one feels in mattering to others at the school. And so I see that maybe aligning to the sense of belonging that parents put forward too. So maybe some connections here as we think about what to act on and how. At the and so some of the actions we're taking here is similarly holding some meetings and focus groups with kids to learn a bit more about their experiences and how we boost engagement at the school. And a few other things that I won't go into, but some steps forward there. At the high school, kids perceived strengths as there being an awareness culturally and actions put forward that kind of honor kids' backgrounds, identities, etc., as well as there being rigorous expectations at the school. So these were things kids thought were strengths of the school. Regarding areas of improvement, engagement comes up again, how excited kids are to be in school. School safety came up, and a sense of belonging. So some overlap here among what students put forward at both sides, which is helpful because then we're able to collaborate and utilize sites to sort of address some of these things that come up that we want to improve on. So the mapping activity I mentioned before, the kindness activity I mentioned before, these are all things that we kind of done to also bring about engagement, a sense of belonging for students too. So got some goals here around how to improve in these areas. What we'll do is in March, circle back to these with this board or the ECPC and report out. If it feels like bringing it to the full board makes sense, we'll do so. But those are the updates with regard to how we use this data. And that we have such a process for collecting data among our stakeholders, which I think is very important for a school. So with that, I'll pause. If there are any other questions folks have, any insights folks have, we can take them. If not, we can move on to the next committee report out.
Josh, just out of curiosity, when you say something like belonging, okay, thank you. When you say something like belonging, what does that mean and how is it measured and how do you course correct on that front or make adjustments?
Yeah. Melissa can also chime in here, but I think of it as being about connection and like an authentic connection with people and feeling at home and welcome when you come into a school, and not like disconnected, foreign, or not feeling like you're welcome. And so, Melissa, I don't know if you'd add to like how you define that or how you sort of see that within the survey.
Yeah, so it's a perception survey, and a sense of belonging is more of a categorical perception, like a categorical series of questions. So I'm looking here at, it's giving me no, giving me the high school. So for example, for school climate, I think is where belonging lives. It asks questions like, how often do your teachers seem excited to teach classes? Oh, here it is. It's a whole quarter. So it asks the questions, how well do people at your school understand you as a person? How connected do you feel to the adults at your school? How much respect do students at school show you? How much do you matter to this school? And overall, how much do you feel like you belong at your school? So those are the questions from children. And those are the same questions asked to students across the country. So
And how do we match up? Because to me, we were all teenagers, right? And that's part of it is just being a teenager, feeling like you're on your own or whatever. How do our scores line up with other schools?
So are compared to, if I look at say urban high schools in high poverty, we're in the 39th percentile, or near the 40th percentile. So we are not at the bottom, not at the top, and I'd like to be at the top there.
Got it. Okay.
That there is also some and I'm looking specific, I'm just sorting for the high school because that's available to me right now. And then that's on this question. There are some differences across the different domains that we look at. And we did see a dip at the high school over last year for kiddos. We've intensified some rules and things, and then some of the relief at being back has
Worn off.
worn off, and now there's the socially navigating a new situation for students, which is really challenging for them, which I think is under a lot of what we're seeing here. Whereas our staff, we saw incredible jumps at the high school level this year. So it's interesting to be able to compare years. It's interesting to be able to compare to similar schools across the country. But that's to answer your question, exactly what's being asked when we say sense of belonging.
Okay.
And why we're looking for more opportunities for connection, and more specific work with the students who we identify, this is of course anonymous, might need like very directed intervention and feeling very connected to someone at school.
Great. Thanks.
So I think with that, we move into the next committee update, which would be the SLC. And I think there, Jeanette, if you want to add anything, I think we talked about headlines and just what's going on in various pockets of school over the past month, and then dove in more deeply to some retention thinking we're doing as we look to improve the percentage of students who graduate from our 8th grade moving on to our high school. And so this was something that came up, I think, a month and a half ago, and seemed to be of interest with members of this board. We've done some analysis and some action planning over the past month and a half. I wanted to bring that back to this team tonight and talk a bit about kind of where we are and what we're going to do. So Janet and I spent some time with this last Wednesday, and so I can share my screen here and talk a bit about our thinking. So give me a moment. opening this back up. Sorry. There we go. No, it is actually here. All right. So I think with this, I'm going to bring to you some ideas at any point in time. If you kind of have an idea you'd like to bring back, a question you'd like to sort of put forward, just stop me at any point in time. The idea is to have this plan be clear both to us who are performing it as well as to the board, so you have a sense of how we're looking to improve retention from 8th grade to 9th grade, or the continuation of kids going from our middle school to our high school. So like first, kind of zooming out, I think, as a school that was built to work with students for 7 years, that prioritizes long-term accelerated growth, having kids depart after 8th grade is not where we're at our best. Having kids continue with us through high school after graduating from middle school is sort of like what we're built around. And so that is the goal in seeing our mission through. Secondly, or in a related way, we're a school that's built around relationships and like to leverage the power of a trusting relationship among kids and staff and educators. And so obviously doing that over the long term, I think is especially powerful versus doing it in 2 fixes in middle school and then in high school. So that's where we're coming from as we think about who we want to be as a school. So here it is, man, as you look at kind of a graduation ceremony at the middle school a couple of years ago, and then our graduation ceremony this past year. So we want kids continuing on to our eighth grade, and more specifically, a vast majority continuing on from our 8th grade to our 9th grade. Here's where we are right now. So if you look at the graph on the right, you'll see that kind of tracks our trend of the percentage of students that in each graduating 8th grade class continue on to our high school. And so you'll see in our first year, 67% of our students continued with us to Unity High in its first year. And then this past year, 30% did. There's been a little bit of a sort of up and down over the course of the past 6 years in this, but headlines here, just that only about half of our students, or less than half of our students in the 8th grade have continued on average to our high school over the years. And so in our first 2 years, we tended to see more of our students attending our high school from the 8th grade. I attribute this, and this is anecdotal, to a number of our staff, a good number of our staff continuing from our middle school to our high school. There being kind of like this blank slate with regard to who we are, some excitement about what can be. And so, so kids continuing on. And then I think over time, we've had less staff, teachers kind of moving into our high school from our middle school, so that kind of connection doesn't exist in the same sort of way, and thinking about relationships. We've moved around a little bit. We've had some hardships. And so I think all of those things have kind of led to this downward trend over time that we now need to get hold of. So during COVID, as you see in the graph, we did see an uptick. There was just less movement overall among schools. And so I think we experienced some of that too. But even in those years, we only had about 50% of our kids continuing on. And so, yeah, that's kind of like where things have gone. And this past year, we had kind of an all-time low. So are there questions about this data, insights about this data that are worth discussing as a team now?
Have you surveyed the ones who decided not to go on to figure out the issue, or?
Yep. So let's get into that. Good question. So before doing that, we're going to zoom in and look at just last year's class, where again, 30% of our 8th grade of our 86 kids enrolled in Unity High. So only about 26 kids. In breaking that down, of that cohort, 26 kids went to Unity High, 9 left New York City public schools, and then 51 enrolled in other NYC public schools. Of those 51 students who went to other schools, 40 enrolled in schools with graduation rates that were lower than Unity High School. Graduation rates just being one measure of many, but one that we thought made sense. Good schools have good graduation rates or high graduation rates. Bad schools do not. And then 11 enrolled in schools with graduation rates that were greater than our school. What you see on the right in really small font are the batch of schools that kids applied to across the board, ordered by graduation, high in green up top, low in red down below. And then you'll see somewhere close to the top an arrow, and that's us. So we're here in terms of graduation last year versus some of the other schools. And so this gives you a sense of just like what we experienced last year and where kids went. Are there open questions based on this data that you think we definitely need to ask and move forward on?
Doesn't seem like graduation is our problem.
Anything
No,
else?
there are some very specific schools that are focused on trades or, very specific interests, which I found interesting on this list.
And so, yeah, if you zoomed in, you'd see some very specialized schools with like career paths in their title. And so not all of them, but a good number of them. And that is partly just how New York City has moved in terms of taking bigger schools and dividing them into smaller schools that are very specialized. So let's get into the major reasons for why 8th graders are not choosing to attend Unity High. This is all anecdotal and mainly comes from Chris and his work, because he's most closely in connection with families as they move into our high school. And so there are 6 reasons kind of he put forward in thinking about his conversations with families. They're not in any sort of order. So let's dig into them. I think one is that families report wanting something different or wanting something new. Others report that there have been teachers at our school that have offered guidance about perhaps going somewhere else. And we do have some kids that do fairly well in our middle school and do apply to some more competitive schools that are not open enrollment and get in. And so in some cases, that's great. In other cases, perhaps that guidance is not as informed as it should be, and kids end up going to schools that are not as strong in support of them toward getting to graduation and earning a diploma as we are. Third, there are some students and caregivers that saw Unity Middle School as too strict, and therefore Unity High is also quite strict. Fourth, caregivers also had the impression, this is just reporting out, not all caregivers, but some, that bad kids go to Unity High. Fifth, that high school students, our building in Williamsburg is just too far from home for kids to make that trek in 9th grade. And then finally, this is sort of outdated, but families and students in the past have said that they just don't want to wear a uniform to school, and so they go elsewhere. And that has come up, I've heard that. So those are the 6 reasons that kind of we identified here. There are others, and again, no weighting here with regard to which one is kind of most potent and which is the least. Are there questions here about what you see?
I guess just on the too far from home, have you looked at where kids go and sort of a mapping time? I'm sure this is, I'm not a plant, I promise.
Yeah, well, a great plan. We'll get into that. And so, yes, we have. And so we'll talk about strategies in a moment. I think what I'll just sort of devote some time to is just the impact of our low retention. So we've got a sense of like what the data shows. We see a decline in enrollment. We've talked about some of the reasons anecdotally that kids seem to be going to other schools. And so let's talk about what that then means for us. And I think, one for us is that a majority of our 8th graders are attending high schools that may not serve them as well with regard to graduation. So that's over the long term. And so this impacts their likelihood to graduate and then be able to go to college. And so that's huge. That's perhaps number one. Second, we devote a lot of time, additional time and resources to backfilling in high school. And so if we had more of our kids going to our 9th grade after graduating from our 8th grade, we could devote resources and time to other priorities at the school. Beyond that, for us, with a majority of our kids entering our 9th grade and not attending our middle school, we just have to start over with regard to developing relationships with them and their families. And for them to be familiar with who we are as a school, for us to know about their talents, their needs, et cetera. And so that's just a disadvantage versus knowing kids over 3 years and being able to share, at least within the same school, information that is helpful to our support of kids. Similarly, there's additional time and resources that must be devoted to teaching kids and families about just how we do things at the school. So our policies, our systems, they're not identical across sites, but there's a lot of overlap and they're coherent. So there's some reteaching kind of going on, or some new teaching going on there for a good number of our kids that attend our high school. Over the summer, maybe one of the more significant issues for us is that without knowing our kids, we're not able to fully plan proactively for what we need to do to best position ourselves to serve kids well. And so classes kids are taking, who we hire, how many sections we offer, not knowing that sooner puts us at a bit of a disadvantage in not kind of like customizing the program we want for the majority of our kids, so that we're optimizing that. So another disadvantage. And then I think if we're not serving the same kids in middle school and high school, there's a lost benefit in being able to collaborate across sites. And so it just kind of creates this reoccurring perpetual silo system where middle school is serving middle school students over 3 years, and then high school is serving high school students at Unity, a different group, over 4 years. And so not ideal. And so there's some inefficiency here. Are there other impacts that you see as negative that perhaps don't make this list, or ones you want to underline as perhaps particularly compelling? Cool. So we're kind of on the same page with what the impacts are. Let's move into solutions here. So what you'll see is the way in which we've done this is we've bucketed some of the negative reasons for kids leaving in red, and then offered some solutions in green down below. So with regard to kids families wanting something different, the middle school being too strict, students having to wear a uniform at Unity, which no longer is the case. I think for us, we just need to sit down with families and inquire what it is that they want and what aspects of the high school are most important to them. And so I think specifically meeting with our 8th grade families in small groups over the course of the spring and learning more about their unique interests, and then responding accordingly is a next step for us. And so Chris would lead that, and that's been happening. Some of these things have happened already or are in process. This would happen from back in November through June of this year. In addition to that, just providing, and we do some of this already too, but I think it's just to do with updating this and making sure that it's tight and clear and compelling to families. Just a one-pager, like, here's who we are as a school. This is what makes us different. So an FAQ of some way that, again, we have, but I think getting this out in different sorts of venues, maybe video-based in addition to a one-pager, being beneficial to families. And so that also happening in the near term. So those are actions right now in response to some of those concerns families have raised. In addition to that, for the families that say you're too smart who hear that you're too smart for Unity High, and some of that coming from perhaps a Unity teacher who's misinformed at our school, things that we've done is meeting with our 8th grade teachers and sharing information and data. Chris has done that work, and so making sure that that is sort of in front of teachers, so they're aware of what they're guiding kids in and where perhaps they may be inaccurate. In addition to that, offering some collaboration across the middle school and high school. I think this is something that we begin to devise over the course of this spring, moving into the summer. We've done some of that work lightly. We've done more of it with our non-academic teams, our non-teachers, with extracurriculars and things like that. I think that's powerful. We'll talk a bit more about that soon, but that's something else that we want to do. And having our 8th grade teachers visit our high school. And having our 8th grade math teacher visit our math teacher in the 9th grade, our ELA teacher in the 8th grade visit our 8th grade teacher in our 9th grade ELA teacher. And so we haven't done a lot of that work just because of time and competing commitments, but it's something perhaps worth doing so that there's an appreciation for what's going on across sites. And then finally, I think the big one just is hiring an academic counselor at the middle school. We've talked about that for the past 2 years. In thinking back to the perception data that we analyzed and talked about 10 minutes ago, the sense of belonging was something that came up at the middle school as an issue. Having an academic counselor that customizes their support of students academically to kids, I think would be one way of creating more of a connection. And also a way of kind of like providing the sort of information families need to make really good decisions about the best options for their kids academically. So those are some things we're thinking about and are putting into action now in response to ensuring that kids are going to the best school they can. Beyond that, another response that we have. So for bad kids going to our high school, I think we just got to like put our kids out there. Our high school kids are awesome. And so making sure that there are plenty of opportunities for our high school students to be recognized for that among our families at the middle school is important. We've done some of that work with our family ambassadors, now meeting as a middle school and high school unit, and then being able to trade stories, talk about kids across sites. That's a strong move for us, and I think will reap dividends. We had a full school family festival in August, which touted just some of the things that we do at the high school that are unique and good for kids. Kids played a role in that. So I think that was really informative for our middle school families. We've done a whole lot of stuff extracurricularly across sites. At the front end of this meeting tonight, no, I didn't mention this. We had a dance recital this Saturday. That was a collaboration between our high school dance teacher and middle school dance teacher. We had 200 families there. That's the kind of thing that gets kids excited about moving on to the high school and there being a connection, a pathway, a familiarity. And so us doing much more of that work now that we're back in action and we're a bit more mature as a school with some of our enrichment programming. So those are things that I think we need to do in addition to spotlighting, again, the accomplishments of our kids, whether it be through our scoop, whether it be through family ambassador meetings and talking about how amazing some kids are doing, kids in college, et cetera, inviting families to our college signing day at the high school. Those are our kids from our middle school and families from middle school attending that. These are all things that I think we will be doing in the spring or in process of doing that I think aid to more of our 8th graders coming to our high school. And so I think I'll stop there. No, I won't. To your point, Jake, your question, Jake, we've got to do a deeper analysis on just the degree to which this is a real concern with regard to distance. And so I think just collecting some stronger data there beyond the anecdotal stuff is a first move. And then beyond that, like creating some concrete information to families on travel and what other families have experienced from similar neighborhoods would be the next step if we feel like it's a real concern that is holding families back from attending our middle school, our high school, from our middle school. And so that's a summary or detailed summary of the actions that we're taking now to get that 30% up to a majority of our kids this year and beyond in future years. Are there insights, advice, things you prioritize among what I provided in terms of our action planning moving forward this year to get numbers up?
One thing I'd throw out there, I've been last couple months painfully involved with this whole insane kindergarten interviewing process. So you get to know these schools in New York. And, you know, we've talked to probably 10 of you know, this is the best of the best. And they do, pretty much all of them do a thing where a child from the upper school is assigned to a middle school student as kind of a buddy. And they tutor and they, you know, it's structured, but it's also very loose. They're probably only, you know, their best students are involved with this, but that's something that they all talk about. And you ask the kids at the lower school about it and they love it. And same with the upper school kids. So I don't know, the distance thing may come into play there, but if there's a way to do that, it's something that all these, you know, especially the girls' schools, they all have some version of that seems to work well.
Yeah, Jeanette actually brought up something similar during our meeting last week. And I think, you know, we don't have anything formally with regard to tutoring. We're doing some of this work extracurricular right now, but there's been some talk of maybe doing some mentoring across sites. It's just about kind of making it happen. So I think that is a nod toward having there be in the eyes of an 8th grader something to look forward to as they continue to our high school. And if they know someone at our high school and appreciate and think they're cool, they're more likely to come to our high school than some other place where they may not have any connection at all. So those little things I think matter.
Josh, real quick on that, between any of the intramural activities, sports, music, etc., besides the dance, are there other like sort of partnerships as well?
Yeah, so there's going to be, I mean, our club programs in the summer are doing more of that work now, cross sites, but I think we've got a middle school step team now, which we didn't have last year. You all know about our high school team. And so I know there's strong connection across sites there. I think that's going to be big for us. And so basketball teams in the same way. So there's going to be, I think this January, some big brother, little brother basketball events going on. Same thing with our girls teams where they co-practice across sites. And so I think that's also a point of connection. So happening there too. We've got 2 National Honor Societies back in the mix. So I see there being some joint community service happening with that. I mentioned the peer mediation program at the high school being launched in January. The middle school's a month behind the high school in that. So I could see there being some cross collaboration there among the coordinators of that. So I think those things are happening. And, you know, we're talking about 70 kids. So it's not, you know, thousands of kids that we're trying to get to our high school. So I think just data wise, you have a sense of where we are now. This is a comparison of last year to this year. We had 84 kids in our class last year. We have 72 this year. What we know right now is that last year, 67% of those 84 kids had applied to a DOE school. And ultimately, again, 30% of our kids ended up at Unity High. So in general, many of the kids who applied to DOE schools went to DOE schools as of December when they applied, January when they applied. And I think last year was a bit later in terms of like the deadline for that. This year, we got 72 kids in our 8th grade. As of now, a smaller percentage of kids have applied to DOE schools. So that's encouraging, meaning that perhaps they're looking more closely, you know, you're satisfied with where they are now. And so I think coupled with the work and actions that we've discussed thus far within this deep dive today, we should see numbers above 50% this year, which I think would be a nice rebound year for us. Ultimately, I'd love to get above 60 to 65% in the coming year. So that's our goal. So in looking at this 3-year kind of retention goal or plan, we're aiming for 60% or above of our kids attending Unity High from our 8th grade this coming year. And then for the kids that don't attend, they're all attending schools that are on par or better than what our high school presents. So we certainly don't want kids going to schools that are suspect. And then over the next 2 years, those numbers jumping up where ultimately we're looking at having 80% or more of our kids attending Unity High for middle school. And that I think would really negate some of the negative impacts that I mentioned in a prior slide. So that's where we are. I think we'll have some updates in the same way that I provide information on enrollment and recruitment. I think we should also look at this in a data-driven way. So I look forward to bringing this back to the board maybe every 2 months between now and the spring. Final thoughts here. Cool. So I think we'll stop there, and I think that concludes the committee report outs for today. And then this was more of a strategic planning report out with some ideas and input. So thank you for that. Thanks. So Jim, we're on annual board business at this point in time.
Okay. Get through these pretty quickly. Okay, first item is the minutes from the prior meeting. Are there any questions, comments, edits? Okay. We could turn their videos on. We'll take a vote. All in favor of approving? Thank you. Okay. Josh, public relations strategy.
Yeah, so I think the updates really are in the school leader report, but I think just one tweak we've got to make here. It was unclear in the minutes, I think from August, whether the agreement with the strategist was $5,000 in total for 1 month, or whether this was a reoccurring monthly agreement, and that is what it was intended to be. So we're working with this strategist through the end of March. It's a 7-month commitment, and so the total cost of that would be $5,000 a month for 7 months, or $35,000. Where we do have the ability to drop out of the agreement if we're not happy with it. Right now, we're happy, and so I think this was just a small clarifying approval item for this board.
Okay, so what are we approving?
Specifically, you're approving that the school is continuing in its engagement with this public relations strategist, assuming it's satisfactory over the course of 7 months or for no more than a cost of $35,000.
All right, any questions? All in favor? Okay, thank you.
And Trudy got to meet got to meet Vince last week when she visited for the theater production. So Trudy, thanks again for taking part in that.
Yes, of course.
It's a wild world, right? All the things we learn
Yeah.
about politics and public education.
Yeah.
Okay, private nurse, Chris.
I can take this. So typically the New York City Department of Health provides free nurses to public schools with over 100 students, or those schools with students with advanced health needs, which is Unity. New York City Department of Health recently has a new nursing supervisor covering schools in Brooklyn who works very by the book. I invited her over. I showed her around the school. They have informed us that the space that the nurse at the high school was using for the last 3 years is not allowed to be a nurse space because it's not private enough. We did a lot of brainstorming, but did not come to a solution. The only available nursing space the Department of Health is willing to give us a free nurse with is currently regularly being used primarily for counseling sessions with our social workers. So for social emotional health. So I researched multiple vendors if we were to pay for it ourselves. 2 never got back to me. 1 quoted me at $100 per hour. Then a third vendor that I was recommended to me from another school quoted at $63 per hour. We have had a nurse come in for a trial run for a few weeks. She's been doing really well. The kids love her. She's been doing more than the New York City Department of Health nurse has been doing already, both in working with students and working with our staff and helping families update immunization records. So essentially I would be requesting, I ran the numbers, it would probably be around $40,000 to $45,000 total over the course of the school year at $63 per hour, 5 hours per day on average, and approximately 32 days over the course of the year. So requesting approximately $45,000 for ATC Healthcare is the name of the agency for nursing services, with the stipulation that I do get a third quote, because I do want a third quote, even though those other 2 vendors did not get back to me.
How did you get the 32? How many days? 30 days?
132 school days. They started.
Okay, no.
Yeah, and then just so you guys know, I also should have mentioned we can cancel services with this vendor with 2 weeks notice, so we're not locked in.
Jeanette, we went over this during the call. Would you add anything from a board perspective?
No, the one other item that we discussed was whether there were any requirements under law that we use, a Department of Health individual, or we follow the requirements that the Department of Health would otherwise require. And, we understand the answer is no.
And Jen, just so you know, also I have provided the Department of Health handbooks to the nurse. So she's very, very much following a lot of the policies that the Department of Health would have been following anyway if there was a Department of Health nurse there.
Are we obligated to have a nurse on site?
Based on obligated, legally no, but based on the health needs of our students, I'd be scared to not have one.
Yeah, okay, good. Okay, any questions? Great.
And just to make sure, the problem with our current arrangement is the physical space is not secluded enough.
Yeah. The only space that we identified that could be viable is being used pretty much all day as a social emotional counseling support space, private support space.
Our social workers use it for private conversations with kids. So there's a trade-off here, and we can't not have that too. That's mandated.
Okay, great. Any more questions? Are we good? Okay. All right, all in favor? Thank you. Next item is the Yeah, the windows and door renovations. Chris,
Yeah.
you want to take that?
I can take that as well. An earlier board meeting this school year, it was approved $42,000 for, this was essentially for door updates and door repairs at 584 Driggs. They've completed that initial scope of work at a rate of 42,500. So it's 500 over the initial rate. That's all been paid, said and done. There is some minor improvements that still need to be made between the door and the wall. It looks horrible right now. There's like a huge crack in this one area. So the same vendor is requesting an additional 3,000 for that final piece of repair. So the total cost for this one vendor would be 45,500 as opposed to the 42 that was approved at the earlier meeting.
Okay, any questions or comments?
Seems fine to me. But by the way, Chris, this is the kind of stuff, you know, for the next, if you could think of more things like this sort of fits into.
Yes, I was thinking about that earlier. Jim and I were actually talking about that earlier, Jake. Thanks. Yep. This is like things that we could think about. Yep.
Okay, great. Okay, all in favor? Thank you. Renewal.
Oh, yeah, awesome. So we have the trailers outside of 584 Driggs. There's 3 trailers. The leases for those were actually up in December. So they're actually up tomorrow. Will Scott, the vendor for it, agreed to continue our current leases and have the leases match up with the parking lot leases. So there won't be any sort of like awkward time where we have one space, but not the trailers. So essentially it's it's continuing at $7,826 per month for the 3 trailers and all the ADA equipment that leads into the trailers, like the ramps. So essentially we'd be voting to continue the leases through July. And then I'm also working with the vendor. Ideally, we'll be able to continue those leases past July at the same rate as well. I haven't heard back from them yet though, but just want to sign off at least so we have it through the end of the school year.
Okay, any questions? Okay, all in favor? Thank you.
Thanks.
And the final item.
Actually, there's maybe one item before the last item would be, do you want to bring simply the underwriter kind of conversation to the board and vote on it now, or do you want to go in executive session and come back out?
Yeah, I
and vote on
wanted to
that?
go offline because based on what we heard today, I'm not sure that it's an approval item, given the cost, the way the thing is funded.
Okay.
So, and I think we need to have more candid conversation. It's probably, not recorded about this. So, yeah, I don't know. I mean, maybe Jeanette is the right person to answer. You know, we're not looking. We're looking at hiring an underwriter and law firms and all this stuff, but really what we're talking about is the underwriter for the bond issue. And technically, we would not be paying for it. It comes out of the bond proceeds. We were told by our attorney today on a call that nobody's worked with ever really goes through the process of getting all the various quotes and such, not because it technically does not come out of our budget. I don't know how I feel about that, but we have done the work and we can talk about that later. Any thoughts? So I think, Josh, let's take this one offline.
Okay.
I was going to say, should we move to executive session?